geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans the world over. Welcome back for another episode, a thrill-packed, um, action-adventure, thought-provoking episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's not waste another second of your precious time. Eyes on the road, everyone. Jay Dishman starts us off here with, I found out that the Transformers Hearts of Steel designs are getting action figures from Hasbro. What are your thoughts on this development? Also, are you going to try to get a copy of one of these 2-packs of the action figures? Yeah, these are toys based on a couple of a mini series I did for IDW back in the day of the Transformers called Hearts of Steel, and the premise of it was that the Transformers are set back in the 1800s, the beginning of the steam era. They're revived, and they take on the technology of the industrial age. Don't say steampunk. I never used that term when I was writing this, never thought about it. I just combined basically Jules Verne kind of technology with the Transformers, and it was a lot of fun to write. Even though I was not a Transformers fan, I was an adult by the time the Transformers came around. I didn't have the kind of innate affection for them that people did growing up with them as toys. When they're playing with them as children. But I dug the concept, and I love the idea of setting this in the 1800s. And I think IDW assigned it to me because they knew that I would work feverishly to keep it in period, rather than try to modernize it. And no, I'm probably not going to get any comps. I don't have any contact with Hasbro. They've probably forgotten the origins of these things. But the real man on this series was Guido Guidi, who did all of these amazing Transformer designs. These 19th century versions of the robots, and he really, it's a shame he can't get some coin off of this, because he did really just terrific designs that made this work. I mean, my hat's off to anybody who can draw Transformers comics and do it well. It's a complex assignment, and in this one in particular, he wasn't drawing established versions of the characters. He was creating brand new versions of the characters. All I did was have to write them. He had to draw them. He had to design them and figure out. And I'll bet you anything, Guido's so talented. I'll bet you anything these things could actually transform. And he had figured out all the engineering and mechanics of it. So I'd like to think that he'd get some coin off of this, but that's probably not going to happen, because this is what happens in comics when you do variations on existing characters rather than creating your own. And these are variations on Optimus Prime and Yellow Jacket and all the others. And boy, I think those are the only two names of Transformers I can remember. But yeah, it was variations, not an original creation. And so Hasbro probably sees no need to give Guido any lira or euros or whatever Guido spends. But that is comics, man. They'll burn you. They'll burn you unless you have creator rights and own copyright or have a really solid participation agreement. Kane Dorr is here with, in today's video, 235, you call Levon Scourge the final book in the series. Will it be your last Levon book? Also, when will Levon Scourge be released at Audible? I don't know. It's got to be coming soon at Audible, particularly with the sales over all the Levon books climbing in lieu of the movie's release. And Amazon's really pushing the books hard. So I imagine an Audible book is not too far away. In fact, the folks at Wolfpack have told me that they are going to be doing Audible books in other languages, Spanish, French, and German to start off with. So as far as it being the final book, I mean, when I made reference to it, I just said it was the latest book I'd written. I tend on returning to Levon. The problem, I don't want to reveal too much about the series or anything else, but I'm toying with the ideas of basically where do I go from here? Where do I go after Levon's Scourge? I don't want to fall into the trap of writing formulaic stories or the sort of murder she wrote trope where the main character is always around people getting murdered. It's always you can go through your entire life and 99.99999% of us do, and we're never in danger or know anybody who's in danger or anything else. And I don't want to turn Levon into one of these characters who just conveniently seems to be near horrible things that are happening all the time. I'd like to think that the series up till now, the first 12 books, him getting himself and Mary into danger has occurred organically, in a natural, believable way, where it's really hard to keep this series as grounded in reality as this kind of series can be. I don't want to write pastiches of 70s action paperbacks. As much as I love 70s action paperbacks, I wanted these to be a little meatier. So I'm working at, and I've got a number of ideas, and I probably will start something before the end of the year on a 13th Levon book, and then continue the series from there. The ideas I have will lend themselves to the series continuing. But for now, let's just let the Cades be happy for a little while. Comics 616, a technical question about the videos. What software do you use to cut out the pics and overlay them? Yeah, I'm not a big high-tech guy. I don't have Photoshop. I don't know how to use it. So I use a snipping program to cut out images so I can overlay them on others. And where I overlay them on is a 20-year-old program for labeling CDs. So you could print your own CD labels. That's a compact disc, kids. For those of you who've never heard of one, you could print labels for your CDs and artwork for the inserts in the CD case. They came in plastic cases, kids. It was a disc. It was a silvery kind of thing that played music. You put it in a CD player. Repeat after me. CD player. So that's what I use, and that's why some of my images look wonky and everything else. But I think that all adds to the charm here, or at least I'm trying to convince myself of that. So what charm there is. Twin spin. All right, my friend, you get another shot at me. Comics 616 in Ask Chuck Dixon 233. You mentioned a school trip to London in the 70s where you found the book Eagles in the Snow. Do you have any special memories, impressions, or anecdotes from your stay? And was it an inspiration of one of your later creations? I don't think so. It was a high school. It was one of those things I don't know if they even do this anymore. A tour company would approach the high schools and say, look, we have these tours to wherever. And so you'd sign up, a few months in advance and save your nickels and dimes and get to visit a foreign country with a whole bunch of your classmates who had volunteered. And usually, even though I went to a large high school, there weren't enough kids, so they would combine us with another tour from another high school. So in 1972, on Easter break, flew off to London and saw all the usual sights: Tower of London, Hampton Court, Windsor Castle, the Tate Gallery, things like that. But they made some odd choices, this tour group. And I found out after I got home that there had been some shenanigans with the tour group. And the tour group had promised, the tour company had promised they would take us to places, and then they didn't take us to those places, and they kind of kept the money that we had paid out to go to those places. So it was a little bit of chicanery happening behind the scenes, but I didn't care because they left us a lot of free days, which I will get into soon. But they made some odd choices. They took us to see a pantomime. If you don't know anything about pantomime in England, it's a theater thing that happens on holiday breaks, Christmas and Easter. I mean, there might be a full-time pantomime, I don't know. But my understanding is it's at Christmas time and Easter time. They put on these really large, lavish theatrical productions for kids. And they're very silly, and there's lots of music and lots of slapstick comedy, and they're generally based on fairy tales, very familiar stories. Peter Pan began as a pantomime, and they're for little kids. So I don't know why they thought a bunch of high school students would want to get into it. And basically, we just sat there the whole time confused because there's a lot of this is a very the pantomime tradition runs deep in the UK, and there was a lot of call and response. It was like the audience already knew what was going to happen. They already knew what to say. It's almost as if the audience, we felt it was like the audience had rehearsed along with the people on the stage, because there was a lot of calling out and getting responses from the audience, and it was kind of a surreal experience because nobody had explained to us what this is, what we're going to see. We were told we were going to see a production of Cinderella, and we show up. We don't know if it's going to be a ballet, an opera, or whatever, and it's a sort of zany, crazy kid show version of Cinderella done on a stage. And obviously, the production, they'd spent quite a bit of money because there was a lot of fun effects and costuming, and there were a number of people in it who were familiar to the TV watching audience in Britain. I recognize Ronnie Bartlett. He played Buttons, and Buttons apparently is a recurring character in these pantomimes. He's your narrator and often the hero of the story. And the kids loved Buttons, no matter who played him. So it was kind of crazy. And then they took us to a West End theater production of Voyage Round My Father with Alec Guinness and Jeremy Brett. And again, we're high school students, and this is kind of a autobiographical drama, family drama about Alec Guinness plays a blind man in the story, and lost on us, totally. I mean, if I saw it today, I'd probably really, really enjoy it. But when I was 17, it was like, okay, the only thing that made it exceptional was it's Alec Guinness. I knew who that was. Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, wow, we're watching a great actor. I only wish I understood more of what I was watching, or had some time to prepare for this experience. We were just sort of loaded into the theater, and we watched this. The only other theater experience I had in London was I went to see Clockwork Orange on its opening week in London with an English audience. And boy, seeing it with an English audience was an entirely different experience than seeing it a few months later in the United States with an American audience. But that was kind of cool. We saw this enormous theater in Piccadilly Circus on this huge screen. And one of our chaperone teachers that went along with us, I suggested to go and see the movie, and we went, and the chaperone teacher took like me and like 3 other kids, and immediately regretted it. If you've ever seen Clockwork Orange, I mean, I dug it, but I don't know if everybody else did. So, but the big thing for me was, I mentioned earlier that the tour guide ripped off our parents and didn't take us to places they were supposed to. Left us with lots of free days. I was there for 10 days, and I probably had like 4 completely free days where we were unsupervised, unchaperoned, could go do whatever we wanted. Many of the kids took advantage of the low legal drinking age in Britain. But I went to the bookstore, and I had heard of this bookstore, Foyle's Books, or Foyle's 4 Books. And it was a legendary London bookstore. And I went there, and boy, I spent the good part of a morning. I mean, I was there for hours, came out with a stack of books. And I got back to the hotel, and some, native person, some English person in the lobby saw my Foyles for Books bag, that it was filled with books. And he says, "Oh, you've been to Foyles. Did you enjoy it?" I said, "Yes, I did." And I said, "But I was curious." I said, "There were no paperbacks." And he said, "Oh, they're in the annex across the street." So I put the books in the room, went right back. and spent the whole afternoon uh, buying another stack of paperbacks at the paperback annex of Foils. So that was a big highlight for me, getting to see books I'd never seen before, and just hanging out in a place that really loved books. I don't know what it's like today. This picture is obviously from the 50s, but I hope the Foils tradition continues. Maybe some of you listening who are from Blighty will tell me, update me. What's the deal with Foils these days? And another thing I did on a free day, I wanted to see more of London, just the city, and I just got on board a bus outside the hotel, and I just went up to the second level and just sat in the bus. And, I knew it was going to come back to the hotel, so didn't have to worry about getting lost. And that bus just took me all over. I got to see parts of London that they don't show you in the tour guides. I got to see, fancy neighborhoods and more, um, less fancy neighborhoods and markets. And I got to see people, interacting and, basically fly on the wall, looking at, average Londoners going about their day. And we got to the end of the line, and the conductor came up and said, you need to get off now. And I said, well, and I explained to him, I said, I'm just staying on the bus. I said, you're going back the same route, right? And he goes, well, yes. And I said, I just wanted to get a look at London. I'm from the United States, and I just thought this would be a great way to see the city. And he said, you're probably right. That was a good idea. For the price of a bus ticket, you got to see a big chunk of London, bird's eye view. So cool. The only funny anecdote I really have about going to the UK was, I was walking through Hyde Park. You got to walk through Hyde Park, and I'm walking the Serpentine through Hyde Park, and I saw these English schoolboys, and they were playing. They were in their uniforms, and they're playing by a fountain, and I was astonished that they had British accents. I know. It's like, what are you, a moron? But it was like, you see it in TV and movies, but you never think you're going to see it in real life, where little children 6 and 7 years old have, have British accents. I felt stupid after I had this revelation. I went, of course they have British accents. They're from here. Maybe people from the UK visiting the United States are astonished the first time they hear a Brooklyn accent or a Southern accent. So maybe I'm not so stupid. But I had a great time. Never been back, sadly. David Jordan. I think outside of the superhero genre, Roy Thomas is one of the best. But within the superhero genre, is one of the most boring writers. It's very much a slog when I read his superhero stuff, especially from the 70s. But to be fair to him, almost all superhero comics at Marvel were boring in the 70s. Yeah, I mean, I like Roy's writing on Conan and other things. Obviously, he's single-handedly responsible for bringing Conan to Marvel Comics, and single-handedly responsible for making Conan a household name. I mean, before Roy Thomas convinced the people at Marvel to put out a Conan comic book, Conan was like obscure. Yeah, people bought the paperback books and everything else, but he was a relatively obscure character. Certainly not at the center of pop culture. Most people had no idea who Conan the Barbarian was. And Roy makes a comic book out of it, and all of a sudden, Conan's got all of these fans. And he really did terrific work, adapting a lot of the Howard stories, coming up with his own original stories. He got the character, he understood the character. He's very conversant, and he presented stories that were, exciting and scary and sometimes funny. And really, this was, his best work. But I agree with you, his superhero stuff, like everyone else's superhero stuff, was a drag. I hated this stuff in the 70s. I would buy it and read it, hoping for something better, and was almost always disappointed. What did I know? I was just some young kid with a dream, snotty comic book fan, thought I knew it all. but but you know, I just found the stuff tedious, and I think a lot of it is that Roy Thomas was such a superhero fan, and so many of those guys, Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, and others, were superhero fans, and they wanted to get that across, uh, help the readers share their love of these characters. But they did it the wrong way. They should have concentrated on more muscular, engaging stories rather than um, reminding people of continuity and recalling the golden age too often and things like that, and concentrating more on continuity and things like that. It led to like very repetitive formulaic stories. Um, and to be fair, they were given their marching orders. Stan Lee wanted everyone to write like Stan Lee. The problem is not everyone can write like Stan Lee, and even Stan Lee in the '70s, it was getting a little tired. Uh, Stan Lee had the advantage of he would always work with the best artists. You know, if he wanted John Buscema on his stuff, he got John Buscema. So a lot of times it was the artist's interpretation of these stories that improved them. But boy, Marvel really uh, lost a lot when they lost Kirby to DC. Um, a lot of the mojo was gone there. You know, there was very little surprises. But you know, all credit to Roy though for Savage Sword of Conan. As much as I didn't care for his superhero stuff either at Marvel or DC, um, you know, maybe I wasn't the audience for it. You know, but his Conan stuff, par excellence. I mean, he just did a hell of a job there, and we all owe him a debt of gratitude for resurrecting um, Conan from obscurity to become that guy we all dig so much. J.S. Pena. I asked you and Graham Nolan the question on who would win in a fight between Bane and Captain America, and both of you claimed Captain America would beat Bane. I'm curious to ask why. Yeah, I think Cap would beat Bane. But though I think Batman would beat Cap because I think Batman can beat anybody. Yeah, he'd beat him because I think you know, if we're getting down to the, you know, discussing the fight card, I think Cap is more agile and he would be faster. As powerful as Bane is, and as powerful as Venom makes him, I don't think it makes him that much faster. Your problem with Bane is if he gets a hold of you, if he gets hands on you, it's like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy. You're finished. Once he gets both hands on you, you're done. But Cap's never going to let that happen because Cap's his footwork's incredible. Plus, I really think the super soldier serum makes him more powerful than Venom. I think Venom has its drawbacks as a delivery system for superpowers, and really, Bane isn't superpowered. He's just at the maximum strength and toughness that a human being can be at, even though he's drug enhanced. Drugs are only going to take you so far, you know. But Cap, you know, he's got so much more abilities. Plus, he's the hero, so he has to beat Bane, right? I mean, who wants to read a story where Captain America gets beat up by Bane? Much as I love Bane, I got to go with Cap here. Jason Shepard. If you could go back in time to the 1960s and work as a comic book writer, which company would you want to work for? DC, Marvel, Dell, Archie, or Gold Key? It would be Marvel all day long. All day long. I loved Marvel Comics when I was a kid. I read DC War Comics. I read some of the superhero stuff, but like 70s Marvel, I always found the superhero stuff disappointing. Um, you know, I liked reading Batman reprints from the 50s. I enjoyed Superman comics. Superman comics were engaging, but once Marvel hit, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Hulk, and all the rest, I mean, that was it for me. It was make mine Marvel all the way. I would still buy DC comics, you know, the War comics, and Fox and Crow and things like that. But it was really all about Marvel for me, and you know, that's what I dug. So if I had chosen back then who I would write for, it definitely would have been Marvel. But I fell in love with the medium too. I didn't just fall in love with Marvel and fall in love with Spider-Man and Hulk and the Thing and the rest. I really fell in love with the medium of comics, and I read, you know, any kind of comic I could get. If you put a stack of comics in front of me, I was going to read them all. I wasn't going to just read the Marvels. And back when I was a kid, comics were everywhere. I mean, you know, uh, other kids had stacks and stacks of comics, and we would trade them back and forth and read each other's books. So, I read everything and I liked everything I read. And so I fell in love with the medium. So when I wanted to become a comics professional and wanted to get into the business, I was willing to write any kind of comics. I mean, I toyed with the idea of joining the underground comic movement. I, you know, interviewed at every company and pitched everything. You know, it's like, what are you looking for? I mean, when Marvel started its Star line of comics for little kids, I pitched Heathcliff stories. I pitched Ewok stories. You know how much I hate the Ewoks, but I pitched because I wanted to be in the game. I love this medium, and if I had wound up writing for Harvey or Archie or Dell or Gold Key, and that was my career, I would have been every bit as happy because I was working in comics. I was working in the medium that I love. So I would be, I would have been just fine with it. I mean, I never intended to become um, as much a part of Batman as I did. I never even thought about writing Batman. As much as I love Batman, I never pitched Batman. I never thought about it at all. I really wanted to work at Marvel. I really wanted to work with those core Marvel characters. Um, Conan, I mean, obviously, I was interested in writing for Conan. I was interested in writing for the Punisher, things like that. But, I ended up writing a lot of different things. I never thought that I would be a regular Simpsons writer, SpongeBob, characters like that. I get invited to write Alien Legion, and it's all about the medium to me. Getting to tell a story in a series of static images. For some reason, just it's in my DNA. I guess because I was exposed to so much material when I was a kid, comic book material. So there you go. Yeah, I would have been happy anywhere as long as I was getting the right comics. Christopher Cohen, regarding your introduction of new character Jeff Wild in your Mark Spector Moon Knight run, who became Mark's sidekick Midnight, you have him start out as a thief who then weasels his way into Mark's life only to turn on him, try to ruin his name, get targeted by the Secret Empire, and then get turned into a murderous cyborg whose story does not get resolved. Were you trying to play like Jason Todd Robin? It's hard to know, as I felt that Jeff's story was constantly getting sidelined. It also seemed an odd that a kid with no real training could even keep up with Mark on patrol or in fights. So did you intend to explore that more or just ran out of room? It seemed like you wanted to do more with Arsenal too, but he got left behind, as did Montana, the mercenary helicopter pilot Mark met in Burunda. Well, not every character is invented to go on and on and on. I don't think I ever meant anything more for Montana in the series. And Arsenal, I was just trying to come up with villains unique to Moon Knight because he only had Bushmen. And so I was trying to build up, I thought it was going to be on the book longer. So I was trying to build up a rose gallery. And with Midnight, I was toying with the idea of a sidekick. And yes, it's basically trying to show you where Jason Todd went wrong. What a real Jason Todd in real life would turn out to be, which would be a big letdown for Mark Spector. And I like the idea of this eager kid wanting to be, part of the superhero scene. And I always meant for him to de-evolve, to deconstruct as a character. I never meant for them to be a Moon Knight, Midnight, them to become a team. Because Mark Spector was reluctant to have this kid around, and and he proved to be right. So it kind of like this was my comment on sidekicks. Oddly enough, because only a few years later I would be the go-to guy on Robin the Boy Wonder, the most famous superhero sidekick of them all. So I sort of like worked out my thoughts and philosophy and everything else. And yeah, a lot of these storylines came to nothing because, you know, midway through my run on this book, there was a change in editors and there were different demands made on me by that editor. There were things he didn't like about what I was doing up to that point. So Midnight was sort of, my Midnight storyline wasn't as fully fleshed out as I might have liked it to have been. But I think it was a good experiment, and it got me to think about stuff. And kind of, you know, later on, I inspired myself by telling kind of a similar story with Nightwing, the Tad Ryerstad, the vigilante wannabe that tries to latch himself onto Dick Grayson in Bloodhaven. And the Tad Ryerstad story kind of takes the Jeff Wilde story all the way to its extreme, which is where I wanted to go in the first place. So I finally got to tell my story of a wayward sidekick in full. So there you go. I hope that explains it all. But yeah, I was kind of workshopping when I was on Moon Knight, workshopping a Batman-Robin relationship, never knowing that I would one day work on Batman and Robin. Tochi, do you think even if Americans were allowed to write Judge Dredd, you would still be banned because Dredd is supposed to be political satire, and at least I suspect guys like Wagner, Mills, and Grant are the opposite of you politically? I'm not sure that's true. I don't know Wagner, and I don't know Mills, but I spent a lot of time with Alan Grant when we were working on the Batman titles together. And Alan Grant, he described himself as an anarchist. Now remember, the political spectrums in England and the United States, they don't really match up entirely. You have to make adjustments. So Alan was pretty much a libertarian, which, depending on who you talk to, either put him far to the left or far to the right. But he wasn't very ideological. So I'm going to place him as a far-right libertarian, because far-right libertarians aren't ideological. They just don't like anything. So, not to say there's anything wrong with that. I think we need, we need people like that. We need the cold analysis of the far-right libertarian to keep us honest. We've had far too much of the far-left crowd trying to give us the feelies. Okay, let's tone that down. But we need guys like Ron Paul to say, hey, you're going down a bad path here, and we need to do this, we need to do that to survive as a society. I can dig all that. Alan was very much like that. And because Alan worked with John Wagner so much, I got to think that they at least had some sort of place where their Venn diagrams met politically. But the thing is that political satire is not the, sole domain of the left. And I think, when I read the Judge Dredd stories, what I like about them is they are satires. They're more social satires than political satires. And no matter where you fall ideologically, there's a lot to enjoy there. I mean, I never really, they'll bring up political things. I mean, obviously, stuff about mutants is analogous to immigration or civil rights or whatever. But there's nothing there that I'm like, well, they have an agenda. They're just telling a story. They're using this political issue as grist for a story. And also, the thing you got to remember about Judge Dredd is it's written by people in the UK. And the general overall view, not shared by everybody, of America in the UK is that we're a little bit crazy and a little bit stupid. And I know Alan Grant did not hold that opinion. Alan Grant loved the United States. In fact, when he would visit for bat summits, he and his wife would spend 2 weeks in the country after the summit just driving around. I mean, driving back roads. Alan saw more of the United States than I'll ever see. I mean, he went to towns I've never heard of, and he really liked the United States. And and I'm not saying that all of the Judge Dredd writers hate the United States, but they're playing to an audience that has a dim view of us. The way we look at Florida, except I don't look at it that way because I'm in Florida, but when we look at Florida man in the United States, that's how Britain looks at us. It's just a little crazy, a little stupid. But like I said, the left doesn't own satire. Christopher Buckley, the son of William F. Buckley, has made a career out of writing excellent social and political satires. If you've ever seen the movie Thank You for Smoking, that's a Christopher Buckley, based on a Christopher Buckley novel. And if you haven't seen it, I urge you to see it. It's one of the sharpest, wittiest, bitterest bits of satire I've ever seen in my life. And the books are excellent. I mean, he's every bit the writer his dad was. And his viewpoint, obviously, being the son of William F. Buckley, is to the right. He is a staunch conservative. And George Orwell, not a conservative, but sort of a disillusioned leftist, who sort of gravitated toward the ideas of conservatism. Animal Farm is an excellent political satire. Not particularly funny, but it is a satire. And I suspect, Jonathan Swift, kind of the big daddy, the grandfather of satire in English. I suspect he was not, if he were alive today, would politically be a conservative. Maybe an atheist, but a conservative nonetheless. So, yeah, if they allowed Americans to write Judge Dredd, I don't think that the political thing would be a hurdle for anyone over here writing it, no matter who they voted for. Okay, Kieran Brunkard. After watching episode 235, boy, we're doing a lot of callbacks today. After watching episode 235, I went to look at Amazon and blackwell.co.uk. I assume that is a book website. To look for reprints of Jonah Hex, but couldn't find them. I remember Jonah Hex in cartoons like Justice League Unlimited, and in DC Comics, The Art of Darwin Cook. What happened to Jonah Hex? Well, Jonah Hex was having a monthly regular run a few years ago, but it kind of that ended, obviously. DC doesn't reprint a lot of Jonah Hex comics, which is a shame because in the 70s, Jonah Hex, along with Sergeant Rock, outsold all of their superhero titles by magnitudes. Jonah was very popular with casual comic book readers, as was Sergeant Rock. And it'd be nice to see them get back to it, but I don't know what to tell you. There was a hardcover reprint a number of years ago, which was excellent, and but they never did the follow-up volume and the showcase editions. And I believe they collected, was it Mick Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti? I believe they collected their run into a number of trade paperbacks. But it's probably one of those things where they never went to second printing, and now those trade paperbacks are being sold at collector prices rather than cover price. So they should bring Jonah back. I think Western comics are due for a comeback. Twin spin. Look at this. Kieran gets a twin spin. Boom. Kieran asks a big question here. What is Image Comics? Some comic book writers from Marvel and DC left to join Image Comics, like Jeff Johns and Mark Miller. Image Comics was basically like a bunch of guys that worked at Marvel. And they decided they weren't being treated right or being paid enough, and they weren't getting enough participation, even though they were making a fortune in royalties. They wisely realized that this can't go on forever, that you make your own luck in this business, as you do in the world. And if they wanted to have any kind of a future, and they were all young guys, they wanted to have any kind of future, they were going to have to carve that out on their own. They understood that there would come a day where they would no longer be the cocks of the walk. They would no longer be the go-to guys. And how do you assure your place in comics if you don't own anything? And so they took the millions, and I mean millions of dollars in royalties that each of them had earned, and they formed Image Comics. And it was sort of a loose confederation of these guys. They're all about the same age. And they opened up offices in California and started cranking out superhero titles that were much like the stuff they were already doing at Marvel. They understood their audience and they wanted to please that audience. And but for my money, in the early days, they made a number of mistakes. They didn't hire professional writers. They didn't like writers. They especially did not like editors. And if you knew anything about Marvel in the 90s, I understood it. I understood their, reluctance, because at Marvel there was what I called the circle jerk, and this circle jerk existed to manage the books that the Image guys were working on. The big titles, Spider-Man and the Hulk and things like that, X-Men. The circle jerk of editors who would hire each other to write the books. Like, I'm going to edit this. I'm going to edit Captain Potato Salad, and you're going to write it. And when you go to write Doodah Man, you're going to hire me to write that. So they were all hiring each other and sort of blocking out any kind of breath of fresh air creativity that might have arrived. It's very, very hard to break into that group. It's very much a clique. And I think that's where the Image guys formed their impression of comic book writers, which was a terrible first impression of what a comic book writer is like. Disengaged, indifferent, not a lot of energy, not terribly creative, just sort of marking time, writing out plot lines. No effort was made by most of those writers to engage in the art of comic book storytelling. That was all left up to these artists. And so these guys, dissatisfied with that, understandably, and they were making buckets of money. And they thought, okay, let's take this money and form this new company, which they did. But the problem was, because they didn't hire professional writers, they didn't seek out professional writers, a lot of their work in the opening years is, full of sound and fury. A tale told by an idiot. They would hire their college roommate or some guy they knew or write it themselves, and they weren't comic book writers. And they didn't understand really what made a comic book story work. They were doing like a dumb show of a comic. It looked terrific. It looked fun. And the art's fantastic because these guys are doing the best art of their lives because they're working for themselves now. But when you read the books, you were left with this empty feeling. Like, that's it? Things like dialogue and pacing and, story construction and deconstruction and things like that, character development and arcs and things. These guys didn't know anything about any of those things and had no interest in any of those things. They'd never had to think about them on their own. And so you're just sort of left with a series of concepts thrown at you all the time, and without any background continuity like they had had. I mean, these guys are working on legacy titles at Marvel and had, decades of history behind them. Now they're creating characters with no history behind them, but thinking that they can capture that same sort of energy that they had at Marvel. Well, you can't, because you're building a new cast of characters. You can't expect the readers to care about them. You have to put a lot of work and a lot of effort into making the readers care about those characters. And they simply weren't doing that. And also, free of comics code, free of Marvel's restrictions, they went a little wild on the content end. The content end where the stories are kind of dark and not really safe for kids to read, so those mistakes were made as well. Now, at the beginning, there was so much excitement surrounding these guys. The book sold amazing, and they made millions of dollars more. So Image was up and running on its own money in a very short amount of time, but it burned out. mostly because of that lack of engagement. I remember very much at the height of Image's powers in the 90s, it was really a rising tide lifts all boats, and comics were selling like crazy, and we were bringing in lots of new readers. Kids had seen these young guys doing their stuff, and they were drawn into it. They were, Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld and Eric Larson and guys like that were that generation's, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and Wally Wood, like when I was a kid, and I attached myself to an artist. So they were getting excited about this. These are new talents bringing a new vision to these characters. And the kids followed them over to Image and bought, millions of copies of these comics, millions and millions of copies of these comics. But then the kids, after a while, realized this isn't the same as when they were at Marvel. There's something missing, and kids don't articulate this stuff. When you were a kid, you would like something or you didn't like something. And when you were asked why, you couldn't explain it. You just knew you didn't like it, and the bloom was off the rose and sales crashed. I remember, we're riding high in December and we're all dead in the water in February. Sales crashed, comic book shops closed, everything got dragged down with it. I'm going to blame Acclaim too, because they just glutted the market with stuff. And everybody was trying to run to keep up with Image. Now, Image is still around today. They continue to go from success to success, here and there. Much like a Hollywood studio, they'll have a comic that's a blockbuster and 10 others that really don't perform. But, they exist ostensibly as a creator-owned company, although they are not a creator-owned company in the model that I think of when I think of a creator-owned company. They're more like a Hollywood studio, where you can come to them with your ideas, but you are not going to walk away owning them 100%. If there's something happens with them, and like with Walking Dead, which Image published, and a fortune is made, you will benefit from that fortune. But it's not my idea of a creator-owned contract. There's certain terms that I won't accept when I see them in a contract, and there's a lot of them in the Image contract. Now, I've worked for Image, but I never created anything for them. I worked on characters they had already established, and they reached out to me, mostly Jim Lee. I think Jim Lee realized, because he's a smart guy, that the problem with the line of comics was the writing. That it wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't equal to the art. And to be fair, that's the history of comics. The history of comics is that the art has always been much, much better than the writing generally. It's been very, very few writers in comics equal to the art, that earn their place in the art form, just writing stories. Generally, the writing lags behind for whatever reason. Initially, at the dawn of comics, the writers didn't take it seriously. They were slumming in comics, and while the artists were hyped up because they wanted to be the next Alex Raymond or next Milton Caniff, and really nothing's changed. You get a lot of writers now, they just want a pencil monkey to put forward their concepts so they can sell something to Netflix. That doesn't make for good writing. It certainly does not make for good comics. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but who cares? It's my show. You paid to listen. And so anyway, that's in a nutshell the history of Image Comics and its effect and its I guess continued effect on comics. Although we'll see what happens with the fall of Diamond and the more closing of comic shops. What will the future for any of these comic book companies be? Will Image turn to crowdfunding? As far as I know, Image may have already turned to crowdfunding. I have no idea. So we'll see. But as the years go by. So, hey, if you have any questions, or hey, what happened there? If you have any questions, suggestions, any more history lessons that I can ramble around on, please let me know at brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. And I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, all the rest of it. And I will see, I hope, every single one of you down the road.